They said the boy didn't need another nanny. They said he had already learned how to make every grown-up walk away. By the time Emily Carter stepped through the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, 17 professional nannies had already resigned. Some lasted a month. Others barely survived a weekend. One left before finishing her first dinner. The rumors followed the mansion like autumn leaves caught in the wind. The billionaire's son never smiled. He never listened. He never spoke unless he wanted someone to leave. Most people blamed the child. A few blamed the father. No one blamed the silence that had settled over the enormous house, like dust no one bothered to wipe away. 3 days later, something happened that none of them could explain. Emily had just reached the front gate after finishing what everyone assumed would be her final shift when the head butler hurried across the stone driveway, his polished shoes scraping against the pavement with surprising urgency. His face had lost the calm expression that years of serving wealthy families had carved into him. He stopped a few feet away, catching his breath before speaking. "Miss Carter," his voice cracked ever so slightly. "Master Noah is asking for you." Emily blinked once. Surely he had mistaken someone else. "I'm sorry," she asked quietly. The butler swallowed. "He said your name." For several seconds, neither of them moved. Behind the tall windows of the mansion, maids froze with folded towels in their hands. A chef slowly lowered the lid of a silver serving dish. Even the security guard standing near the entrance stared without pretending not to. It wasn't because Noah had asked for help. It wasn't because he wanted dinner. It wasn't because he needed anything at all. It was because, for the first time since his mother passed away nearly 4 years earlier, the 8-year-old boy had asked for someone to stay instead of asking them to leave. Emily looked back toward the enormous house. The afternoon sun reflected off its endless glass windows, making it look less like a family home and more like a museum where laughter had once existed but had been carefully locked away. Somewhere behind those windows was a little boy the world had already decided was impossible. Somewhere inside sat Daniel Whitmore, one of the youngest billionaires in America, a man who could buy private islands before breakfast, yet could not convince his own son to eat dinner at the same table. Emily tightened her grip on the worn canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. Inside were an old water bottle, a paperback library book, and a lunch container she had forgotten to wash before rushing to her second job that morning. Nothing about her belonged in a place where imported marble stretched farther than the tiny apartment she shared with her 7-year-old daughter. Yet somehow, against every expectation, the one person who had pushed everyone away wanted her to come back. 72 hours earlier, Emily Carter wasn't looking for a miracle. She was only hoping to pick up one extra shift before the rent was due. She had no idea she was about to walk into a house where every room looked perfect, every hallway echoed with expensive silence, and one lonely little boy was quietly waiting for someone who would stop trying to fix him long enough to simply see him. 72 hours earlier, the Whitmore estate looked exactly the way luxury magazines loved to describe it. The limestone walls glowed beneath the afternoon sun. Perfect hedges framed the circular driveway. A fountain whispered at the center of the courtyard, its water sparkling like polished glass. Everything suggested peace. Everything except the people who worked there. They moved quietly, speaking in lowered voices as though even ordinary conversation might disturb something fragile hidden inside the house. Emily stepped out of her aging sedan, smoothing the wrinkles from the plain blue blouse she had worn through an early breakfast shift at the diner. The restaurant manager had reluctantly agreed to let her leave 2 hours early after hearing about the temporary childcare interview. Emily had thanked him twice before driving across town with her daughter Lily's smiling school picture tucked inside her wallet, like a tiny reminder of why she kept saying yes to every opportunity. At the front entrance, an elderly butler greeted her with a polite smile that did not quite reach his tired eyes. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming." His voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who had spent decades welcoming important guests. "I am Arthur." Emily offered a gentle handshake. "Thank you for having me." Arthur hesitated for only a moment before leading her inside. "I should probably prepare you," he said softly as they crossed a marble foyer large enough to hold an entire neighborhood coffee shop. "Master Noah has strong feelings about strangers." Emily nodded without asking for details. Children often had reasons adults failed to notice. They passed a grand staircase, an elegant library, and a formal dining room where 12 chairs surrounded a table untouched by fingerprints or family dinners. Everything felt immaculate. Nothing felt lived in. A woman carrying fresh flowers hurried past them, then quietly leaned toward Emily as if sharing a secret. "Do not take anything personally." Before Emily could respond, the woman disappeared through another hallway. Arthur opened the door to a bright sitting room overlooking the gardens. "Please wait here. Mr. Whitmore will join you shortly." Emily sat carefully on the edge of a cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than her car. The silence stretched. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed. It was not loud enough to frighten anyone, but every employee within sight instinctively paused. Arthur closed his eyes for the briefest second before continuing on as though nothing had happened. A few moments later, footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. Daniel Whitmore entered without ceremony, wearing a navy dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. His appearance was polished, but exhaustion lingered beneath his calm expression, the kind that expensive suits could never hide. He studied Emily for several seconds before offering a courteous handshake. "Miss Carter." "Mr. Whitmore. Arthur tells me you have experience raising a child." Emily smiled gently. "Every single day." "Professional childcare certifications?" "No, sir." "Private tutoring?" "No." "Behavioral therapy?" Emily shook her head. "No." Daniel glanced toward the folder in his hand. "Then why apply for this position?" Emily looked out the tall window where the afternoon breeze stirred the branches of an old oak tree. Her answer came without hesitation. "Because children usually tell us what they need. Adults just forget how to listen." Daniel said nothing. For the first time that afternoon, the quiet between them did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of a question neither of them knew how to answer. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed the folder and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the gardens. Beyond the glass, the estate stretched across rolling green lawns, perfectly trimmed flower beds, and winding stone paths that seemed designed for peaceful afternoon walks. Yet no one walked them anymore. The beauty remained. The joy had quietly disappeared years ago. "Every candidate says they care about children," Daniel finally said, still facing outside. "Some bring degrees. Some bring awards. One even wrote a best-selling parenting book." He gave a faint smile that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. None of them stayed. Emily remained silent. She had learned long ago that people often revealed the most important truths after the conversation seemed finished. Daniel turned back toward her. "Noah decides very quickly whether he trusts someone, usually within minutes. And if he does not?" Emily asked. Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment. "They leave." Before either of them could continue, a sharp clatter echoed from somewhere upstairs. It sounded like a tray sliding across a hardwood floor. Then silence returned. Not nervous silence. Familiar silence. The kind every employee had apparently accepted as part of daily life. Daniel did not react. Neither did Arthur, who had quietly appeared outside the sitting room carrying a silver tea service. The old butler simply placed 2 cups on the table with practiced grace. "Chamomile for you, Miss Carter," he said gently. "Black coffee for Mr. Whitmore." Emily looked surprised. "How did you know I prefer tea?" Arthur smiled kindly. "People who spend their mornings serving coffee rarely choose it during quiet moments." Emily laughed softly. It was a small sound, barely louder than the fountain outside. Yet Arthur's expression brightened as though he had not heard genuine laughter inside the mansion for a very long time. Daniel noticed it too. His eyes drifted from Emily to the butler, then back again. Another unexpected detail filed away without comment. As Emily wrapped both hands around the warm cup, she noticed a framed drawing sitting alone on a nearby bookshelf. Unlike the expensive artwork decorating the walls, this picture had clearly been made by a child. A crooked little house stood beneath a bright yellow sun. 3 stick figures smiled while holding hands. The edges of the paper had faded slightly with time. Emily stepped closer. "Did Noah draw this?" Daniel's expression softened almost invisibly. "No. He drew it with his mother when he was 4. Emily studied the picture a little longer. Something felt unfinished. One corner had been folded and carefully repaired with clear tape. Someone had protected it instead of replacing it. "It belongs here," she whispered. Daniel nodded once. "He used to draw every day?" "Used to." Daniel looked toward the staircase. "The day after his mother died, He packed away every crayon in the house. His voice remained steady, but the sentence carried years of quiet exhaustion. Emily did not offer sympathy. She did not say she understood. Some losses were too personal for borrowed words. Instead, she simply returned the picture to its exact place on the shelf, carefully straightening the frame before stepping back. At that exact moment, a small movement caught her attention. On the second-floor balcony overlooking the foyer, a boy stood perfectly still behind the wooden railing. Barefoot, thin shoulders hidden beneath an oversized gray sweatshirt. Light brown hair falling carelessly across his forehead. His blue eyes never blinked. He was not looking at his father. He was looking only at Emily. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them smiled. Then, just as quietly as he had appeared, the boy disappeared into the hallway without making a sound. Arthur slowly released a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Daniel followed the empty hallway with his eyes before looking back at Emily. That, he said almost in a whisper, is the longest Noah has looked at anyone in months. Daniel remained standing long after Noah disappeared from the balcony. He had seen therapists wait months for a glance that lasted less than a second. Yet somehow, the woman sitting across from him had received one without asking for it. He folded his arms, more out of habit than confidence. Most people would call that progress, he said quietly. Emily looked toward the empty hallway above. I would call it curiosity. Daniel raised an eyebrow. There is a difference? She nodded. Curiosity means he chose the moment himself. Progress usually means an adult decided what success should look like. The answer lingered in the room. Arthur glanced discreetly toward Daniel before lowering his eyes again. It was rare for anyone to speak to the billionaire so naturally. Stranger still, Daniel did not seem offended. If anything, he appeared thoughtful. A soft chime echoed from the grandfather clock in the foyer. 4 o'clock. Somewhere outside, a lawn mower hummed in the distance before fading again. The mansion settled back into its familiar silence. Then another sound interrupted it. Small footsteps crossed the hallway above. Slow. Careful. They stopped directly over the sitting room ceiling. Emily did not look up this time. Instead, she reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a slightly worn paperback with colorful illustrations on the cover. Daniel noticed immediately. You brought a children's book? Emily smiled. My daughter checks it out from the library almost every month. Planning to read it to Noah? Emily shook her head. No. She placed the book on the coffee table without opening it. Books are patient. They know how to wait. Daniel looked confused, but said nothing. Minutes passed. No one touched the book. Arthur quietly excused himself, sensing the room no longer needed another voice. The afternoon sunlight drifted across the polished floor inch by inch, warming the edge of the rug where the paperback rested alone. Emily sipped her tea. Daniel answered 2 silent messages on his phone, before setting it face down beside his untouched coffee. Nobody spoke. Then, almost too softly to hear, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside. Emily kept looking toward the garden. Daniel instinctively turned his head. The doorway remained empty. Another quiet step. Then another. Finally, a small figure appeared just beyond the frame of the open door. Noah stood there with both hands hidden inside the sleeves of his oversized sweatshirt. He stayed close to the wall as though ready to disappear again if anyone moved too quickly. His eyes were fixed on the colorful book lying on the coffee table. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but Emily gently lifted one finger without even looking at him. Not as a command. More like a quiet reminder that some moments belong to silence. Daniel closed his mouth again. Noah took one cautious step into the room. Then another. The distance between him and the table could not have been more than 12 feet, yet each step looked like a question he was asking the world. Emily never turned around. She simply continued watching the oak tree sway gently outside the window. A pair of blue jays landed on one of the branches before flying away again. Noah reached the coffee table. His fingers hovered over the paperback without touching it. He studied the cover for several seconds. Then he looked toward Emily. She still had not acknowledged him. No cheerful greeting. No forced smile. No invitation. Only calm presence. At last, Noah carefully picked up the book, held it against his chest, and quietly walked back into the hallway. Daniel stared after him, completely speechless. Every nanny before had tried to earn the boy's attention. Emily had done something entirely different. She had given him room to choose. Daniel did not realize he had been holding his breath until the sound of Noah's bedroom door clicked softly upstairs. It was such an ordinary sound, yet every employee within earshot seemed to notice it. Arthur returned carrying the untouched coffee pot, stopped for a moment beside the doorway, and allowed himself the smallest smile. "That has never happened before," he said almost to himself. Emily looked up. "What part?" "Master Noah has never taken anything that belonged to a visitor." She nodded thoughtfully. "It does not belong to me anymore." Arthur blinked. "Excuse me." Emily smiled gently. "If he carried it away, then he needed it more than I did." Arthur lowered his eyes, as though the simple answer had quietly unsettled something inside him. Daniel remained silent, but he could not stop replaying the scene in his mind. Every expert he had hired had arrived with lesson plans, structured activities, reward charts, and carefully researched strategies. Emily had arrived with a library book that was no longer hers. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Daniel finally spoke again. "Miss Carter, I should be honest with you." She looked toward him. "This position was originally intended as a full-time live-in arrangement." Emily nodded. "Arthur mentioned that." Daniel folded his hands together. "The schedule is demanding. Some days begin before sunrise and end well after dinner." Emily listened without interrupting. "You have your own daughter." "I do." "Would that make accepting impossible?" Emily glanced at the family photograph tucked inside her wallet before answering. "Lily comes first. She always will." Daniel appreciated how quickly she answered. No hesitation, no apology, just certainty. It reminded him of someone he had almost forgotten. Before he could continue, the housekeeper entered carrying a neatly folded stack of freshly washed towels. She paused when she noticed the serious conversation. "I am sorry, sir." Daniel gave a polite nod. "It is all right, Grace." Grace smiled warmly at Emily before leaving the room. As soon as she disappeared, Emily noticed something unusual. Nearly every employee she had met carried themselves with quiet professionalism, yet each one looked emotionally exhausted. Not physically tired, emotionally careful, as though everyone inside the mansion spent every day trying not to make the wrong sound. She turned toward Daniel. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "When was the last time your son heard someone laugh in this house?" Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped. He searched his memory. Business dinners, charity events, holiday receptions, hundreds of guests, thousands of conversations. Yet none of those memories included Noah. The answer never came. Emily lowered her eyes, not to criticize him, but because she already understood enough. Children noticed what adults stopped hearing. They noticed empty chairs, closed doors, meals eaten alone, voices that disappeared, love that became too busy to sound like love anymore. Daniel slowly sat down, suddenly looking older than he had an hour earlier. "After my wife passed away," he admitted quietly, "I thought giving Noah stability meant keeping everything exactly the same." Emily listened carefully. Same routines, same rooms, same staff, same schools. He looked around the elegant sitting room. "I did not realize I had also preserved the silence." The words hung gently between them. No accusation, no defense, just truth. Outside, the afternoon breeze carried a handful of golden leaves across the stone patio. Emily watched them dance for a moment before standing. She picked up her now empty teacup and carried it toward the kitchen doorway instead of leaving it for someone else to collect. Grace looked surprised when Emily thanked her for preparing the tea. The elderly housekeeper smiled with genuine warmth, perhaps for the first time that day. Upstairs, hidden behind a bedroom door that remained slightly open, Noah watched everything. Not the conversation, not his father. He watched the woman who thanked people no one else seemed to notice. Emily thanked Arthur for his kindness, slipped the empty teacup onto the kitchen counter, and reached for her canvas bag. The interview felt finished. She had not expected an offer, and strangely, she did not feel disappointed. Some houses welcomed people. Others simply allowed them inside. This one still had not decided. As she adjusted the strap over her shoulder, Grace hurried after her with a neatly folded blue cardigan. "Miss Carter," the housekeeper called softly. "You forgot this." Emily looked down and smiled. "That is not mine." Grace blinked. "I found it on the sitting room chair." Emily gently shook her head. "I never took off my sweater." Both women stared at the cardigan for a second, before Arthur quietly joined them. His expression changed almost immediately. "That belongs to Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered. Grace looked confused. "But it has been in the upstairs closet for years." Arthur carefully touched the sleeve. Someone must have brought it downstairs. Silence settled over the kitchen. No one needed to ask who could have done it. Noah was the only person who entered his mother's old room. Even then, only occasionally. Emily stepped back, sensing that this was not her memory to interrupt. "You should put it back where it belongs," she said gently. Arthur nodded, but did not move right away. He held the cardigan with the same care someone might use to carry a fragile photograph. Daniel appeared at the kitchen doorway a few moments later after noticing the unusual stillness. Arthur quietly explained what they had found. Daniel stared at the familiar blue fabric without speaking. He remembered buying it during a weekend trip to Vermont years ago because his wife had laughed that she was always cold, even in spring. He had not thought about that afternoon in a very long time. Memory had a strange way of hiding inside ordinary things. A sweater, a drawing, a library book. Emily watched the emotions pass silently across Daniel's face. She did not ask about his wife. She did not offer comforting words. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of construction paper decorated with uneven crayons. "My daughter made this for me last week," she said with a quiet smile. Daniel looked down at the colorful page. In crooked letters it read, "For the best mom ever." Tiny paper hearts surrounded two stick figures holding hands beneath an oversized rainbow. Emily laughed softly. "She still thinks I can fix everything." Daniel looked at the drawing longer than he expected. "Can you?" Emily slowly folded the paper again before answering. "No." She slipped it back into her bag. "But children do not need us to fix everything." She looked toward the staircase where Noah had disappeared. "Sometimes they just need one grown-up who does not leave when life becomes difficult." The sentence settled deeply into the room. Arthur quietly lowered his eyes. Grace wiped at the corner of one eye before pretending to organize the pantry shelves. Daniel looked toward the second floor again. For years he had measured success by contracts signed, companies built, and impossible deadlines met. Yet standing in his own kitchen, he suddenly wondered whether the most important promise he had ever made had been the one he kept breaking without realizing it. Upstairs, Noah sat cross-legged on the floor beside his bedroom window. The colorful library book rested unopened beside him. In his lap lay his mother's blue cardigan. He gently traced the edge of the sleeve with one small finger before placing the children's book on top of it, almost as though he believed the two belonged together. Then, for the first time in months, the corners of his mouth softened into something that was not quite a smile, but no longer looked like loneliness either. Emily thanked everyone once more before walking toward the front entrance, believing the afternoon had quietly come to an end. The late sunlight stretched long across the marble floor, turning every polished surface a soft shade of gold. Arthur opened the front door for her, but before she reached the first stone step outside, a sharp voice echoed through the estate. "Master Noah is gone." It was not a scream. It was something far more unsettling. The calm voice of a security supervisor who had suddenly realized the impossible had happened. Within seconds, the peaceful rhythm of the mansion changed. Footsteps hurried through hallways. Two housekeepers exchanged frightened glances. A gardener set down his pruning shears and looked toward the rear lawn. Daniel was already moving before anyone finished explaining. "When was he last seen?" His voice remained steady, but every word carried urgency. "About 15 minutes ago, sir," the supervisor answered. His bedroom door was open. "The room is empty." Daniel reached for his phone. "Search the grounds. Every building. Every camera." Employees scattered in different directions without another instruction. Emily remained near the doorway, quietly watching the sudden storm unfold around her. She noticed something that everyone else seemed too distracted to see. Nobody called Noah's name. They were searching for him, but they were searching the way adults searched for a missing file, following procedures instead of memories. Daniel looked toward the long list of security camera feeds displayed on a tablet. Gardens, tennis court, indoor pool, stable, guest house. Every corner of the estate appeared empty. Emily stepped closer. "May I ask one question?" Daniel barely looked up. "Please." "What happens when Noah feels overwhelmed?" Daniel hesitated. "He hides." "Where?" "We have checked all of his usual places." Emily nodded slowly. "Then today he probably chose somewhere new." Daniel frowned. "How can you know that?" Emily looked toward the second floor where the blue cardigan had been found only minutes earlier. "Because today has already been different." She closed her eyes for a brief moment, replaying every quiet detail from the afternoon. Noah had watched without speaking. He had taken the library book. He had brought his mother's cardigan downstairs. None of those choices were random. They all pointed toward memory, not escape. Emily opened her eyes again. Does your wife have a favorite place on the property? Daniel answered almost immediately. The old greenhouse. Then he stopped. His expression changed. It has been locked since. He never finished the sentence. Emily was already walking toward the back gardens. Daniel followed without another question. Arthur hurried behind them, carrying an old ring of brass keys that jingled softly with every step. The greenhouse stood nearly 200 yards beyond the formal rose garden, hidden beneath tall maple trees whose branches shaded the weathered glass structure. Nature had slowly reclaimed the stone path leading there. Small wildflowers pushed through the cracks between old bricks. It no longer looked forgotten. It looked asleep. Arthur unlocked the faded wooden door. It opened with a quiet creak. Warm afternoon light filtered through dusty glass panels, filling the room with a gentle glow. Empty clay pots rested on wooden shelves beside watering cans that had not been touched in years. Then Emily noticed something small near the back corner. The colorful library book rested neatly on a weathered garden bench. Beside it sat Noah, wrapped loosely in his mother's blue cardigan, looking through the dusty windows at a single white butterfly drifting lazily among the overgrown flowers. He did not appear frightened. He did not appear lost. He simply looked like a little boy trying to remember someone he loved. Daniel took one step forward, then instinctively stopped. Emily quietly placed a hand on his arm. Not yet, she whispered. He already found what he came here to find. Let him finish the moment before we ask him to leave it. No one entered the greenhouse. Not immediately. The air inside carried the faint scent of old cedar shelves, damp soil, and memories that had been left untouched for far too long. Sunlight slipped through the weathered glass ceiling in quiet ribbons, settling across the faded garden bench where Noah sat without moving. The white butterfly drifted lazily from one overgrown flower to another before disappearing into the warm afternoon light. Noah watched it until it vanished, then lowered his eyes to the children's book resting beside him. His fingers slowly traced the edge of the cover without opening it. Daniel stood frozen just outside the doorway. For years he had measured every problem by how quickly it could be solved. Yet standing only a few feet from his son, he realized there was nothing here to solve. Only something to understand. Emily gently stepped inside alone. Her footsteps were slow enough that the old wooden floor barely answered them. She stopped several feet away from the bench, close enough for Noah to know she was there, far enough that he never felt cornered. She looked around the forgotten greenhouse with quiet admiration. Your mom must have loved this place, she said softly, not expecting an answer. Noah remained silent. Emily noticed several empty clay pots lined neatly along the windowsill. A small watering can rested beneath them, covered in a thin layer of dust. My daughter tried growing tomatoes once, she continued with a gentle smile. She watered them every single morning. Nothing grew for weeks. She was convinced she had failed. Noah's eyes shifted ever so slightly toward her. Emily picked up one of the empty clay pots and brushed a little dust from its rim. One morning she decided to stop checking every hour and just let the little plant do its work. A few days later, the first green sprout finally appeared. She carefully returned the pot to its place. Some things grow better when nobody rushes them. Silence filled the greenhouse again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt patient. Outside the doorway, Daniel listened without interrupting. Every sentence seemed meant for a child, yet somehow reached him as well. Noah looked down at the blue cardigan wrapped around his shoulders. His small hands held the sleeves tightly for a moment before slowly relaxing. Then something almost invisible happened. He lifted the children's book with both hands and extended it toward Emily. It was not a gift. It was not a goodbye. It was simply trust being returned. Emily accepted it with both hands as though receiving something priceless. Thank you, she whispered. Noah nodded once. The movement was so small that anyone looking away might have missed it. Then, after another quiet moment, he spoke for the first time that afternoon. His voice was soft from lack of use, almost carried away by the breeze slipping through the cracked greenhouse window. Mom used to read here. Daniel closed his eyes. Arthur quietly lowered his head. Grace, who had followed at a respectful distance, pressed one hand gently against her heart. Emily looked toward the empty garden outside before answering. I think she would be happy that you still remember. Noah looked at the butterfly returning to circle the flowers once more. Everybody keeps taking her things away, he said. I thought, if I stayed here, maybe it would still feel like she was coming back. Daniel could no longer remain where he was. He slowly walked into the greenhouse and knelt several feet from the bench instead of reaching for his son. His voice trembled with honesty rather than certainty. I am sorry, Noah. I thought putting everything away would make it hurt less. I never asked what you needed. Noah looked at his father for a long time. Then, his small hand quietly reached across the bench until it rested against Daniel's. No speeches followed. No perfect answers appeared. Only a father who finally stopped trying to repair grief and a little boy who no longer had to carry it alone. The ride back to the mansion was quieter than the drive to the greenhouse had been. Noah sat in the back seat beside the faded library book, still wearing his mother's blue cardigan, while the late afternoon sun painted long golden shadows across the estate. No one felt the need to fill the silence. For the first time in years, it no longer sounded empty. It sounded peaceful. When the car stopped beneath the front entrance, Noah climbed out without waiting for anyone to open the door. He paused beside Emily, looking at the worn canvas bag resting against her shoulder. The book, he said softly, holding it out with both hands. Emily accepted it with a gentle smile. Thank you for taking good care of it. Noah looked down for a moment before asking, almost too quietly to hear, Can I borrow it again tomorrow? Emily felt something warm settle in her chest. Of course, she answered. Books like being read more than once. Noah nodded thoughtfully, then turned toward the front steps. Halfway to the door, he stopped and looked back. Will you come back tomorrow? The question floated through the evening air with all the weight of a promise. Daniel stood perfectly still. Arthur forgot he was holding the greenhouse keys. Grace quietly covered her smile with one hand. Emily looked at Noah, then at Daniel. Before she could answer, Daniel stepped forward. That depends on Miss Carter, he said gently. Emily smiled, but her expression remained honest. I still have a breakfast shift at the diner tomorrow morning. Daniel gave a small nod. Then we will work around your schedule. She looked surprised. You would? I have spent years expecting everyone else to fit into my calendar. His voice carried a humility that had not been there that afternoon. Perhaps it is time I learned to fit into someone else's. Arthur quietly looked away, pretending to adjust his glasses. He had served 3 generations of the Whitmore family and had never heard Daniel speak that way before. As they entered the house, Noah walked beside his father instead of several steps ahead. Their hands did not stay together every second, but neither did they drift apart. Sometimes healing began with nothing more dramatic than choosing the same direction. Emily gathered her things near the front foyer. Grace slipped a small paper bag into her hands. Fresh cinnamon rolls, she whispered. For your daughter. Emily's eyes softened. You really did not have to. Grace smiled warmly. I wanted to. Emily thanked her, then thanked Arthur as well before heading toward the front door. Just as she reached the threshold, Daniel called her name. She turned. He held out a simple white envelope. This is not an employment contract, he said. Not yet. Emily accepted it curiously. Then what is it? It is tomorrow's invitation. She opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note instead of legal paperwork. It contained only one sentence. Please come as yourself. That seems to be exactly who this house has been missing. Emily folded the note carefully and slipped it into her bag beside Lily's drawing. She smiled one last time before walking toward her old sedan waiting beneath the evening sky. From the second-floor window, Noah watched until her car disappeared beyond the front gates. Then he quietly turned toward his father. Dad. Daniel looked down. Yes. Noah hesitated only a second. Can we leave Mom's greenhouse open tomorrow? Daniel followed his son's eyes toward the fading sunlight outside. He smiled through the quiet emotion in his voice. Yes, son. The old greenhouse would breathe again. And without anyone realizing it, so would the family that had almost forgotten how.